Hello, everybody, and welcome to the BA and Product Management Days 2021. I'm super excited to introduce to you our next speaker. It is Paula Gray. She is a trained social scientist and the Director of Research and Knowledge Development for the worldwide certifying body for product and brand professionals, the Association of International Product Marketing and Management. You might also have heard of it as AIPMM. As one of the regional co-founders of the AIPMM, she has over 20 years of experience helping product, marketing, and branding professionals deliver world-class goods and services. With undergraduate and graduate degrees spanning multiple social science disciplines, she brings expertise unique and highly sought after in the international business world. Her anthropology background allows her to share insight on how goods and services fit within the micro and macro cultural framework. Her psychology background sheds light on what moves and drives purchases and adoption decisions, both on an individual and global scale. Her sociology background puts goods and services within their ever-present social context. So today, Paula will talk about the critical boundary spanning role of product manager. Paula, the stage is yours. Welcome. We're super excited to have you here today.
Great. Thank you so much. And so I'm excited about this session today because I'm not going to be talking about product management, but I'm going to be talking about product managers, the people, and what this role means and what makes it unique and incredibly challenging. So first, we're going to do this. We're going to define the concept of boundary spanning. It sounds sort of complex. We're going to break it down, what it means, and what it means in the role of product manager. It poses some unique challenges for the product manager, but I've got some ideas because, as you said, I've been the original co-founder of this association, and I've been working with product managers for over 20 years. So not only do I study product management, but product managers in the social sciences as well. So I've got some insight there into the human behavior aspects. So we're going to look at those critical steps and skills for success. We're going to look at some relationship skills. We're going to look at establishing credibility. We're going to look at organizational knowledge, that's that internal knowledge, and then domain knowledge as well. All right, so let's dig in here. Let's define this concept of boundary spanning. It sounds sort of academic here. Well, let's take a look at this graphic. Now, I can tell you that when I talk to oftentimes young product managers, they tell me, oh, this is sort of a new concept, and they're just sort of exploring this idea and it's just sort of coming to fruition. But I can tell you that it's been around quite a while. And this particular study done out of the University of Rhode Island was done by Dr. Stephen Lisonsky. And this piece of research is dated 1985, and he cites some research done in 1972. So what Dr. Lisonsky did in 1985 is he identified that the product manager sits in this place that's outside of the scope of the other departments in the organization and outside of those external environments as well. We're going to dig into it, but I want you to kind of see this graphic here. I want you to feel the aloneness of the product manager sitting right there, and all of you listening here know exactly what I'm talking about. You don't get to, huddle into advertising or R&D or production in this graphic here. You're kind of stuck out on your own, and we're going to talk about why you feel that way, what unique challenges it poses, and then how you can sort of leverage where you sit. All right, so first let's talk about what we mean and define these boundaries. So there are boundaries within the organization. So look at where the product manager sits here, outside of each of these departments. And those departments have boundaries themselves. So not only does the product manager sit outside of those boundaries, but they are boundaries between those internal environments as well. So they are separate from each other, and the product manager is separate from all of them. Then we look outside. So then the firm here, as you see in the graphic, the firm has its own boundary. So there's one very big boundary that separates the firm, the organization, from the external environment. And you see externally, we have competitors, consumers, and they have boundaries between them as well. Now, the product manager's role here, and I'm sure you feel this, maybe you haven't been able to really articulate it, but you feel this here. The product manager's role really requires bridging these boundaries or spanning these boundaries in order to be effective. So the unique challenges here are that the constant bridging or spanning causes a unique kind of stress, a unique type of stress. By that, we mean that because you don't feel surrounded in one of those departments, you can't sort of nestle into and feel the security of one of those departments there. You sit on the outside of them. So the product manager is uniquely an outsider. I like to think of the product manager almost as the anthropologist of the organization. In cultural anthropology, traditionally, we would study a society, a culture of people. And one of the things we learn in anthropology is that we are forever the outsider. We may be an expert on a particular culture. We may understand their traditions. We may understand the language. We may have a deep understanding of that group of people, but we're forever an outsider to them. And that's where the product manager sits. The goal here is to understand each of these internal departments and those external fields as well. But the product manager will forever be an outsider. Now, that's not a bad thing, okay? That's not a bad thing. And we're going to talk about how to leverage that. But what's important to note here is that this role requires translating or translation as part of boundary spanning, meaning that it is the product manager's job here to translate between departments. And I'm referring to little t translation for little l language, not native tongue, not native language. I'm meaning the unique language or lexicon that's used by each of these internal departments and all of those external organizations as well. That where that product manager sits, I'm going to go back to that graphic for 1 second here. That where that product manager sits, notice all those arrows are pointing into the product manager and then coming back out from the product manager. So the product manager takes in all of the information from each of these departments at both external organizations, internal departments, and they translate it for the other ones because they don't speak each other's language. So advertising doesn't speak the language of production. Finance and accounting really doesn't speak research and development. It's sort of, and yes, they do interact between each other. Yes, they do. But oftentimes that product manager is the translator between each of those departments. So it's a bit unsettling to sit in that role, but look at that tremendous influence you have. But know that your that challenge and how it feels a bit unsettling is completely normal. So let's talk a little bit about how to leverage that. What skills and steps you can take to be a better outsider and be a better translator. And again, this comes from research done on the role of product manager. It comes from my 20 years of studying product managers and working in many different types of organizations with teams from many different industries. I think I've been to 20 plus countries now. So I've had the opportunity to see what this looks like across the world. So let's talk about relationship skills. So let's first begin with the relationships inside the organization. So as I said before, the product manager really does not belong to any single department. So sitting outside of every department here, we see that the product manager, though, interacts with nearly every department in the organization. Now, the challenge here is that often the interests of those different departments are in conflict, right? Sales wants additional features in the product, R&D and development that don't want to add a particular feature, right? We all know these challenges, right? So oftentimes those interests conflict, and the product manager often sits in the middle of that conflict. The other challenge here is that the product manager really doesn't, have the power to require any of these individuals in these other departments to work with them, so to cooperate with them. And that is a significant challenge. Well, there are some ways that we can mitigate that or offset that or even leverage that. And that's knowing that as a product manager, you've got to strike a delicate balance. You can't show favoritism to any of these departments to keep your objectivity, to be able to translate and be that sort of individual that has that bigger view of the organization and the process, that you've got to strike that delicate balance between all of those conflicting interests. And your power and your effectiveness as a product manager lies right for relationship skills, lies right here in these 3 points. Number one, empathize. The ability to empathize with these individuals in the other departments, okay? So this means as a product manager, you're not always just pushing your agenda, but you're understanding the challenges that each of these departments have. Because you see the bigger picture, you need to be able to not only see that sort of global scope, that bird's eye view, but you've got to empathize and go deep down into each one of these departments to understand, why do they have these conflicting priorities? Why do they have these agendas that seem to be inconsistent with each other? You've got to empathize and go deep into each one. Now, it may be that you need to spend some additional time in these departments. Maybe you need to get a deeper understanding. If you didn't come from development, and I speak to a lot of product managers that came from development or came from R&D before moving into product management, that's great. Okay, you've got a deep view into that department. Maybe you don't have as much depth of knowledge of what customer support does. Maybe you need to spend some time there. Maybe you need to spend some time with the sales team to understand what they experience from the inside, so that they feel that you can empathize with them. There's a certain level of trust that you get there. Number two, you need to be able to assess their priorities. Now, this is not you need to prioritize, you need to assess your priorities. No. Number two here is you need to understand the priorities of each of these stakeholders, because you need to understand and be able to gauge and weight those priorities in importance. So you need to understand and assess their priorities, what's moving and driving their issues, their timelines, right? And understanding and assessing their priorities. So that's from their perspective. And then number three here, you need the ability to persuade. Again, like I said, it's not just about pushing your agenda. You need to build, and all of the points that we're going to talk about after this will help in that persuasion, persuadability, your ability to persuade. But you've got to work from there, because you can't muscle these other team members, right? You can't force them into cooperating with you. You have to be an effective persuader. Okay, so but a big part of that is going to come from these other 2 points as well. Understanding what's maybe driving the pushback that you're getting from one of those departments. understanding where that's coming from so that you can then empathize with them and address those concerns. Because remember, you are the translator here. You want to understand their world and understand what's moving and driving their decisions. Now, of course, you've got the external relationships, right? So that was from the perspective of our internal relationship, building those internal relationships. Well, you've got to build the relationships with the external organizations as well. Some examples here, your customers, and both business and consumer or retail customers as well. And you're empathizing and understanding their priorities, your partners, your key strategic partners, your competitors, right? So even if you may not have a very close, personal relationship with your competitors, you need to understand and empathize with what's driving their decisions as well. Consultants that you might work with, distributors or channel partners, again, by understanding their needs, understanding their priorities, you're going to be a better persuader when you need to affect a change with your distributors or channel partners. The analysts and media, oh my gosh, those are incredibly important external relationships. Industry thought leaders and influencers. Goodness, we've seen those really sort of move to the forefront in the last number of years as well. And then government agencies and individual legislators as well, as those can often impact how we do business as well. And remember, look at this graphic, you are sitting at the intersection of all of that information and your organization. So you are going to translate, little t translate that to the internal organization as well. So you are also the voice of your partners. We hear about the voice of the customer all the time, but you are also the voice of the analysts and media. You are the voice of your distribution and channel partners as well. You are the voice of those thought leaders and government agencies as well. So you are the translator. All right, now let's look at this second. So that set of relationship skills is key. Now let's look at credibility. So there's two facets of credibility that I want to talk about here. So let's first talk about credibility for others' peace of mind, okay? And we know as the product manager, there's a whole lot of others that you're dealing with, okay? So we're going to look at from the perspective of others and the perspective of you internally as well. Well, I am a big advocate for professional certification. Now, what a professional certification does is it gives a third-party validation for someone's knowledge, skills, and abilities. It's bigger than just having attended a single class or that sort of thing. A certification really is that gauge of efficiency and proficiency. Here I have as an example this hour that we offer at the AIPMM, the Certified Product Manager Credential. Now, when you are looking at a certification, there's some things that you need to take into account, take into consideration in order for that certification to lend credibility to you, right? It's every sort of certificate or certification out there won't necessarily lend the same level of credibility. So let's talk about sort of the criteria there. So when looking at a certifying body for any type of certification, you want to ensure that that certifying body itself has established global credibility. Now, it's great to pick up like sort of quick skill builder courses from consultants or other small organizations. Those are great. I'm a big advocate for those as well. But when it comes to your personal brand as a product manager, when it comes to establishing your personal credibility across the organization, I'm a big one in ensuring that the certifying body itself has a level of credibility. The second point here, ensure that it's got a well-established breadth and depth of influence and knowledge. Again, quick skill builders are great with little small regional organizations. They're great, but we're now talking about your personal brand here with a certification. Also ensure that there is, that the organization that is delivering a certification has a published body of knowledge. And I actually wrote an entire paper studying, it was called From Occupation to Profession, with product managers, studying what that transition looks like. And one of the keys is that a published body of knowledge must exist in order to really transcend or to transfer that occupation to a profession. And our organization, the AIPMM, has published that, and it's called the AIPMM, the Prod Box, the Guide to the Product Management and Marketing Body of Knowledge. Okay, so this professional certification, for others' peace of mind here, we're looking from their perspective. Well, it establishes trust. It establishes trust and it mitigates risks for others. So think about, there's a lot of trust that you as a product manager must gain within the organization, outside the organization, and knowing that you are looking from the perspective of global best practices will allow, especially internal stakeholders, will allow them to sort of relax a bit in that fear of risk that they have, knowing that you are operating from globally accepted best practices versus just, you know, what you've sort of picked up on the job. So it establishes and helps others peace of mind. But, okay, also that credibility, that professional certification gives you peace of mind, okay? So it allows you to know and ensures that you are confident in knowing best practices. Now, I have, in the 20 years that I've been talking to product managers and studying product managers, I know that a lot of you out there learn to do what you do on the job, okay? And that's great. That's a great place to start, right? You know, you've had real world experience, but know that you've only learned one way to do something. Okay, know that there's a whole lot of other complexity out there that you may not have seen or you may not understand simply because you haven't crossed that path yet. So it's better to know global best practices, you know, to add that to your repertoire, to your personal portfolio of skills, than just keeping on doing what you know how to do because that's all you know how to do. And this sort of goes into that next point. When we don't know what we don't know, it's best to find experts who do, right? You know, I always do that. I am absolutely, I will do that. Anything, any hobby, anything I'm thinking of doing, I go right to an expert, an industry expert, because I want to know, I know that there's a whole lot of context around why they suggest something. So, so that certification just ties right in there. All right, so that's credibility. Now we're going to look at the third real major pillar here of being effective as a product manager, and this is organizational knowledge. All right, so organizational knowledge, this is all of the things that are inside that firm box, right? We're focused inside there. And this is bigger than the org chart, okay? This is not just understanding, well, this is how our organization is structured. Yes, I get that. But you know, as a social scientist, I study social hierarchies, I study corporate culture, and I can tell you that that organization has its own culture, its own internal culture, its own organizational culture. There are sets of norms of behavior in that organization that are unique. There are taboos, which meaning things we want to avoid, things that are considered bad, that are unique to that organization. Like, for example, oh my goodness, don't mention that product launch, that disaster from, you know, 2008, right? Like, don't ever mention that. Okay, nowhere, that's sort of an unwritten, unspoken rule. Nowhere is that written that we need to avoid that, but we just know. And when you become, the term's called enculturated, When you join an organization, you begin the process of enculturation, which means you join that culture. You begin to learn the infrastructure, that internal framework and infrastructure of the organization. You begin to learn the rituals and those norms of behavior, and it adds to your effectiveness if you can effectively navigate that internal structure, that internal framework. Another part of your effectiveness here is to understand the legacy, heritage, and history of that organization. That sort of ties into all these other pieces here. You've got to know, especially if you've got some legacy individuals in the organization that have all of that knowledge with them. They're going to be inspired by or driven by different set of criteria than some of the new people might be, because they know how things operate. And you know what? It's good to have those people as an ally, right? It's good to take some time to understand it, you know, maybe even interview some of those individuals that have been in the organization for a long period of time. Just, you know, buy them a coffee, you know, or grab lunch together. These people are a wealth of information. I can tell you in anthropology, when we, in cultural anthropology, when we go to study a culture, study a society of people, we immediately establish relationships with what are called informants, meaning they are people on the inside and they can help translate for us. Okay, so you need some informants that really understand the organizational culture and that history and legacy that can assist you. So think through, as you're navigating this, think through looking at breaking down this social hierarchy. Who wields the power in the organization? And it's not necessarily the higher ups on the org chart. I can tell you, I worked with one organization, and it was, there were a team of about half dozen ladies in the human resource department that controlled everything. New product launches, whatever, they actually had more power than the C-suite individuals. They had more power than the CEO, CFO. They were the ones, and they were also called gatekeepers. So they held access back from people to the C-suite individuals. So they were the ones who wielded the power, and you could not study the org chart to determine that. So that was just part of that organization's unique culture. So also think, who's a good ally? Okay, and again, it might not be someone necessarily up on the organizational chart. It might be someone who is less obvious. All right, now let's look at the fourth pillar here. So we're looking, the domain knowledge is looking outside the organization. So you've got to know where you sit to be an effective product manager. You see why this is so complex. And I could actually speak for days on this topic, okay? I'm just trying to condense into this short period of time, but it's incredibly complex here, okay, because of each of these pillars that I'm talking about. So let's look at domain knowledge, okay? So to have credibility and to have that level of trust with your internal and external stakeholders, you've really got to understand the domain of where your organization and your product sits. And my favorite model for this is Porter's 5 forces. Porter, also called the 5 competitive forces or Porter's 5 forces. It has several different names, but we're going to just take a look at it here in a moment. As you look through this, I don't want you to just say, oh yeah, I'm familiar with Porter's. Yeah, I understand that. No, I want you to understand it from the complexity of how it affects you as an individual, because it represents relationships and strategies and structure. I want you to see how it affects your product, right? Because your product is sharing this challenge with you, right? Your organization, how it fits your organization, your company, the industry, right? The entire industry, your geographic region, okay, where you sit in the world, because where your organization sits really does affect your culture. even though your product may ship globally, your organization and may have a very distinct culture based on its region in the world. And then, of course, the global and cultural context. Think of how COVID has shifted and changed, what we do as a product manager and a lot of aspects of what we do. So let's take a look at Porter's 5 forces, but let's look at the lens here through all of these components. So remember, with Porter's 5 forces in competitive rivalry, you sit in the center with your competitors, right? So understanding the domain in which you sit, know that right there, your competitors sit in the center with you. So the other 4 forces press in on your competitors as well. But think of these forces as how intense of a pressure each one is being, extracted on you, okay, is pressing in on you. Competitive rivalry in the center. So think, well, do we have just like literally dozens of competitors that are really effective rivals, effective competitors, legitimate competitors in the center there? Or do we have a product? Do we represent a product that's fairly unique out in the market? So looking at how that force presses in on you. Now, remember, you are translating all of this, right, to your internal organization as well. So knowing where you sit here is so important. So how much force that competitive rivalry is placing on you and your product and your organization. Now let's look to the left there. So in the models that you see of this, it's called barriers to entry, threats of new entrants. It has several different names, but that one piece is always the threat or the uncomfortable pressure you're withstanding because there are threats of new competitors, okay? So when we say barriers to entry, when we're talking barriers, we like barriers, right? We like barriers because it's sort of a block that is preventing new competitors from joining you in the center. So we like barriers. But if the barriers are low and it's quite easy to join you and your competitors in the center, it's quite easy to be a new entrant as a competitor, that's a difficult force for us. So this is about knowing this industry, okay? It's about knowing and how the complexity of this industry affects you and your product. So is it easy for new competitors to enter, or is it more difficult? So the well-recognized brand, so if you are a strong global brand and maybe one or two competitors are also, well, then a new entrant, a new competitor is going to bump up against some pretty strong brands. Now let's look at substitutes. Okay, now remember, so you and your competitors products sit in the center here, but substitutes, that's when a customer can go outside of the category to solve the problem. Okay, so think about, this threat of substitutes here and the pressure and the weight that's putting on you. So it's difficult and it's uncomfortable if it's easy to substitute outside of the category. So let's say, for example, you are an automobile manufacturer and you and your other competitors, your other automobile manufacturers sit in the center there. Well, a substitute to purchasing an automobile could be taking an Uber. We see that in a lot of urban environments, Uber or taxi, or perhaps taking the subway, riding the bus. Those are substitutes, okay? They aren't sitting in the center with you, but they are something you need to keep your eye on as a product manager because that affects you as well, even though it's completely outside of your category. Now let's look at suppliers, okay? So these are those external relationships, right? So mitigating the pressure your suppliers place on you will be important here. But what do we need to know in this context here? So this is how much pressure, how much power those suppliers wield over you. So for example, if you have several dozen suppliers, you can switch at will and go with a widget from another company at the drop of a hat. Well, then the pressure of the power and the force of suppliers is kind of easy on you. But if you purchase a piece of technology from one supplier and it's proprietary and you know, it's integrated in your organization, then that supplier wields a lot of power over you. Okay, so you've got to manage that relationship effectively and know that that's a bit of a vulnerability for you, for your product, for your organization. If you have only just a few suppliers that you rely on and you can't switch easily, that doesn't mean you have to go out and begin switching. I'm just saying that you as a product manager in this complexity of relationships know it's a bit of a vulnerability for you. So you want to manage those relationships accordingly. You want to know what's in your supplier's pipeline, right? You want to know what's on their roadmap. You want to know, remember I talked about empathizing and assessing the others' priorities. You want to know that with your suppliers as well, because especially if they wield a lot of power over you with something proprietary. And then finally, in this model, let's look at buyers or customers. You know, you can call them either one here. Now, this looks at how much power they wield over you. Again, just like we looked at suppliers. Now, the way we sort of gauge that is if you have maybe a dozen enterprise level customers, each one of those customers or buyers wields tremendous influence, right? They have a lot of power. Versus if you literally have 10 million customers, well, then, you know, the individual customer wields less power over you. But you still need to understand your target customer, whether it is that large enterprise organization or whether it's 10 million individual consumers. You've got to know what their priorities are because that affects you, right? And the distribution channels that get to your buyers and customers. That affects you. So understanding that and looking at how much power this particular force exerts over you is going to be important. So again, I know this model, you're probably very familiar with this model, Porter's 5 forces, but I want you to see this in the context of the relationships that you've got to build and the risks you have to mitigate here, and the translation you have to do from these external organizations, these external sources and components here, and how you translate that internally as well. All right, so now I know this has just been packed with information. I mean, we've gone psychology, sociology, anthropology, all in the last few minutes. Okay, so just to summarize, the product manager is a complex boundary spanning role. And you know what? I know you get that. I know you feel that. I know you feel that every day, but I want to say that kudos to you. Okay, give yourself a little round of applause because that is a difficult place to be. It's an incredibly difficult place to be because the ground is a bit shaky there, right? You can't just rest into, yeah, you know, I'm part of the R&D team. Hey, I develop, that's what I do, you know. No, you as the product manager have to have that global view, right? And, you know, from the internal spanning all the different departments, the external view, the global view, the cultural view, you see why this is an incredibly complex role. And you know what? It's not for the faint of heart. I can tell you right now, a special kind of person, it takes a special kind of person to be a great product manager. It's not for the faint of heart. You know, it's not for someone who can't stand complexity or who can't stand ambiguity. Ambiguity is your life, right? Because you're constantly moving between and within these boundaries of, you know, the internal and external role organizations here. All right, so we talked about some things that you can engage, that you can employ, that you can utilize to help be a little bit more successful, because I know you're already doing this well right now, But because I go deep in the study of these things, I just wanted to give you some tips that you might not have thought about to help you in your role a little bit. So the relationship skills, remember, that spans the internal relationships and the external relationships. And you are the conduit through which all of those happen. Okay, so being an effective empathizer with the others, understanding and assessing their priorities, right? Because that's how you're going to be a better persuader, right? To get their cooperation, to get their insight, to get them to work with you, you need to know what's moving and driving their decisions. So you're not pushing. That's not necessarily effective. You have to sort of, lead from the side here a bit. So those relationship skills are important. Credibility, establishing credibility both for the external individuals and stakeholders, but also for yourself as well, so that you know that you are working from and operating from best practices. I'm going to just add one more point here. The concept of neural plasticity. Okay, neural meaning in the brain, plasticity meaning changeable. The concept of neural plasticity. When we learn a certain way to do something, and that becomes a pattern, and that's how we think about it, our brain begins to develop sort of ruts of thought. That problem comes up, that issue comes up, and we just slip right into the same path of solving it like we've always done. But when we go out and when we learn best practices out, and we hear in our classes too, when I teach our classes, I like to use examples from different industries, because I know you as a product manager, you've already sort of got rules associated with how things are done in your industry. So I like to use examples outside your industry. So when, especially in a certification like ours, we force you to think differently. Okay, because you have the ability for neuroplasticity. You have the ability to think differently. And when you go outside of the ruts that you already know, when you think outside of that, all of a sudden, an entire world of creativity opens up for you. So pretty excited about that. So definitely consider that. Then third, we talked about organizational knowledge. That's the knowledge of the internal workings. And like I said, it's bigger than the org chart. Don't just study the org chart. Study who actually wields the power, not who's higher up on the org chart. Look at how things are done. Look at those patterns of behavior. That's what you're looking for here, are patterns of behavior, so that you can see, wow, everything seems to stop at this one person. All the initiatives seem to somehow go through this one person. Okay, then that person probably would be a very good ally for you. So thinking through the knowledge of the internal organization. Then lastly, we talked about domain knowledge. That's looking outside. That's having knowledge of what it looks like out in the world. So this looks at all those external relationships and where those all fit, like your suppliers, like your customers and your buyers, like your competitive, like the competitive rivals, right? And even those substitute products, because they may actually be pulling customers away from you and your competitors as well, right? And then how likely or feasible it is for new competitors to join you in the center. All right, so this is I know it looks complex on here. Love, love, love this. You can download this. This is the product life cycle that we use in establishing best practices. So all of this came about when myself and 59 other people did this research to develop this product life cycle, the phase review process here, and to build the ProdBox, that body of knowledge. So that was not written by or just crafted by, half a dozen individuals. It has pulled in information and data from all over the world. All right. Well, thank you so much I know it's been kind of a whirlwind. There's just so much here. And I love talking about human behavior and all the complexity. Thank you so much for being in this session with me. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear what you're doing and hear your challenges. I am right now connected to a little over 1,000 amazing individuals around the world, and they're not random. I know each and every one of them. So please, please feel free to reach out to me. And if you have any questions, if you want to just, chat a little bit about this, send me an email. I'm happy to get on a Zoom call. If you want to talk with some of the stakeholders in your organization, you just want to have a private chat to talk about, maybe you're getting some pushback a bit on something in your organization. So absolutely reach out to me. All right. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
And
thank you so much, Paula. It was an amazing presentation. It was also so inspiring, and motivating in terms of, how much a product manager has to know, but also, yes. I actually noticed a lot of support from your side.
Yes, kudos to you. Right.
Yes. And actually also we have quite a bunch of questions. So if you don't mind, we will start with the Q&A. Okay, awesome. So we'll start with the most popular one. The question is from Jan Mazurek. Having such a huge responsibility and so many dependencies, what are the good practices and tips and tricks in not becoming a bottleneck in the product lifecycle?
That's what this entire presentation was about. So it's, so you're not the bottleneck, you need to be the free flower of information. So those arrows come in and then back out of you. Part of your success is going to be the ability to disseminate information and from those internal stakeholders as well. So, so make sure that you are hearing from them. Make sure that you are understanding their priorities so that you want to feel and empathize with them as well. So that's going to help you and inspire you, right, to move forward. And make sure too that they understand you're the translator. So if sales doesn't understand why that feature can't be added now because the customer is asking, enterprise level customer is asking about it now, well then translate for your development team. Say, here's why. And it's your role then to use that language of translation. Okay, that's again, what's challenging is you've got to translate for development to the sales team. You've got to take development's language and sort of shift it and frame it in a way that the sales team will understand development's priorities as well. So very good question. Good question.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your response. So let's go to the next one then. So the next one is from Ludmila Hladun. Have you met any professional product managers with failed products and vice versa? Newcomers who managed to launch super successful products? How much product success depends on the product manager in your opinion? What other factors can ensure the success of the project for a lonely outsider product manager?
Okay, wow, that was a lot. That's like a day's worth of content there. Okay, so yes, I work internally with a lot of teams. I can't necessarily reveal those teams. Yes. So yes, I have worked with product managers that have had amazingly successful products and those that didn't do as well. Now, I can tell you that that there are some teams that have been allowed to do effective market research. I'm a big proponent of market research so that every other piece in this process is informed by market research. So we know that there's a demand, that there's a concept of the product push, versus the product pull. Okay, right. Hopefully we are operating from that product pull. There is a demand for this product, that we are balancing the priorities, right? Because we know, there's probably some developers on this call. We know that their job is to just push, build what we build because we are experts in building that and just build the next thing. But the product manager really, again, what makes it so complex is balancing the priorities, right? Balancing that, ensuring that, are we meeting the customer's needs? Yes, I know we can build another we can build 2.0, but is that what we need right now? And is the functionality we're building into it what our customer needs right now? So it's the complexity is balancing those priorities. And with effective market research, we can ensure that we are launching something that has that need out there. Right.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your response. Actually, that question just became the most popular one. So thank you.
And, and you can all reach out to me, if you want to talk specifically, if you've got a challenge in your organization, feel free to reach out to me too, because I have a whole host of skills on persuasion and all that too that I could share with you that will help as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, so the next question, if you don't mind. The next question is from Marta Taranko. Which skill should a beginner product manager focus on first to bring the most value to a product? Example, domain knowledge, tools and frameworks, soft skills, maybe anything else. Of course, they are all important, but probably some of them make more impact than the rest.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to give you two. Number one, relationship skills, okay? Because I want you to think any question you have domain-wise, you can answer in a relationship skill. So start there, okay? So if you want to understand the complexity of what you're developing, go talk to the developers, okay? Go build that relationship. Say, if you come from a non-technical background, then use your internal subject matter experts to, number one, build relationship skills. Number two, it's going to help you learn the domain as well. This is probably not the first product that developer has worked on. They are deeply embedded in that industry. They can give you a whole host of information. Think of the sales team. They are talking to your customers. They can tell you the challenges your customers face. So number one, you're not only getting the information you need to do your job better, okay, but you are building the relationships as well. So it's sort of a twofold thing. Then yes, do your own research on the domain, like the Porter's 5 Forces, build that out on your own as well. But the first thing, if you are sitting in this seat right now, you're beginning your job, start with relationship skills and use your subject matter experts in every one of those roles. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Good question. Good question. Yeah.
Oh, we have plenty. So, yeah, we will try to answer as much as we can, and then I guess we will wrap up. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. So the next question is from another user. Product management and marketing body of knowledge was published a long ago. Do you think it is still actual?
So it's okay. So the best practices of, so think of that as an infrastructure, okay? Those best practices are an infrastructure. So like a building with a solid infrastructure, the window coverings may change, the paint on the building may change, but the infrastructure of that building is solid. Same with those best practices. Yes. Now it looks different. Yes, products are a little bit more complex than they were in 2000, 2015, right? We've got much more complex, still a product. Marketing, same thing. Social media, all of the complexities involved with all that, still marketing, still human. So I'm going to give you my definition of business. Awesome. Business is, you've heard this one, yeah. Business is one human or a group of humans attempting to affect a behavior change called a purchase or an adoption on another human or group of humans. Okay, right. That's the basics. That is the crux of it right there. Okay, so now looking at the best practices to do that, that human behavior and what moves and drives us, that stayed the same, for eons, right? So this, so though the, terminology may change and complexity may shift and change, it's still humans trying to affect a behavior change on other humans. So that is absolutely still relevant. The culture may change, the language may change around it, still absolutely relevant. Good question, good question.
Awesome. Well, actually, I think this should be put in writing and sold as a merchandise or something like that, because this is so relevant,
Right. Because people are like, oh, well, it's so complex, and is that a product? And I don't know, whatever. Okay, so you are all in the business of behavior change.
Yes, exactly.
Because I get that too. I worked with an individual who was a product. She was a chemist, and she was a product manager for an industrial adhesive. And she's like, "Oh, Paula, this is really interesting stuff, but it doesn't apply to me because my product's an adhesive, right? It's and it's sold to other businesses that stick things together, And I was like, oh my gosh, it's absolutely relevant. Because it's still people. Okay. Yeah. You say, oh no, organizations buy my product. Oh no, it's people. An organization can't buy your product. People do. Even so, exactly. A friend of mine was the CIO of PayPal. And outside of PayPal, it's something that says the same sort of thing. It's always people. People are, in business. It's the business of people. So very, very good question.
Awesome. Okay, amazing. So we have a few more that also became quite popular. So the next one is from Ruslan Ahmedov. What education, skills, and expertise should one have to start a product management career? Are there domain, industry-specific product managers who have to have industry-specific experience?
So I think it would depend on the industry. I can tell you that early in my career, I came across a lot of product managers with social science backgrounds, and they would try to hide it. They were like, really? Oh, I have a degree in sociology. Don't tell anybody, But when I explained the concept of behavior change and the incredible reliance on relationship skills in the internal organization, they got the importance and the value of those degrees. And I have many friends now out in business. A friend of mine is director of consumer research, and she's an anthropologist. I've got a lot of other friends with social science backgrounds doing market research as well. So now in some industries, it may be beneficial to gather some additional domain expertise. But as a product manager, remember, you don't sit in any of those other departments, okay? Right. You don't sit, right? I know an excellent product marketing manager who may very well be listening in here in the pharma field. And so he comes from a business background. And so his job has been to understand and learn pharmaceuticals. He's become quite an expert on particular virology and efficacy rates and all this kind of stuff. So you can learn that, but know that your job first is to understand the people. Understand the people. Right.
Awesome. Actually, I will use this opportunity and ask my question as well.
Okay. Okay.
So, Paula, especially keeping in mind your, extensive experience and background in psychology, sociology, etc., I wanted to ask you this question that quite often arises when we have some, trainings for product managers internally. So the question is how to train or how to build up empathy for, users, since you especially mentioned that, it is all about, behavior, human interaction, etc. So maybe you can suggest some activities or some tips regarding, how you can train empathy, because anything can pretty much be trained. So I assume that, your empathical self can also be improved.
Sure. So one of the things is that when we, especially not coming from that background, so working with, very technical people, and I work with a lot of technical people, empathy first for them in that role, they need to intellectually understand it. So that's usually, unfortunately, where it stops. Yeah. Defining empathy, understanding what it means. Right. Yes. Okay. Right. So then we need to look at, okay, what does that feel like? Now we need to start using emotion words, feeling words. So language here is key. Okay. So when we understand what I that? What does it feel like to have that challenge? What does it feel? Tell me. And then start breaking down the structure. So not like, give me 5 reasons that, no, let's just talk about what that feels like and get down to that level. That's where the empathy comes from. Not like, I'm going to write down the 5 challenges. No. What does it feel like? What does it mean when they have to do that? One of my grad school professors did an ethnography. So she actually observed families. So she was tasked with understanding the American family breakfast. She actually had breakfast with families,
Wow.
So she didn't so this tell me what breakfast is, right? That's
yes.
Right. She actually had breakfast with them and just hung out with them. I have a lot of friends who are social scientists that do this in market research. They'll just hang out because you can get a lot more from direct observation, watching people. Remember, you're picking up body language as well in that. So that will help you. As humans, physical presence means a lot. And oh my goodness, in COVID, we're seeing a lot of people struggling with that. But physical presence is important. So that's where I'd start.
Awesome. Paula, thank you so much for such an amazing presentation and also for such insightful, responses to the questions from our audience. It was a great pleasure to have, all this knowledge shared with us. So thanks a lot again.
Thank you so much.
Hope to see you again maybe next year.
Yes, absolutely.
So thanks a lot. Thank you guys. And we'll see you at the closure. Please move on to the next section. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.